Emma Harris never thought her quiet Saturday morning in Seattle would change her life. The day began like any other. Her flower shop smelled of fresh roses and rain, and soft jazz played in the background as she prepared a wedding order. She loved her shop pit, was her little world filled with colors and calmness. She bent down to pick up a fallen petal from the floor, and at that exact moment, she heard a voice behind her say with a small laugh, "Be careful, you'll ruin those pretty flowers." Startled, she turned around quickly and froze. Standing at the door was Daniel Reed. She hadn't seen him in 10 years. Her mind went blank for a second. He looked almost the same, tall, confident, but softer now, with little lines near his eyes and a calmness that hadn't been there before. His hair was slightly grayer, but his eyes still held that same warmth she remembered from college. And then she noticed the wedding ring on his finger. Emma tried to hide her surprise with a polite smile. "Daniel, wow, it's been forever." Daniel smiled back, that familiar smile that once used to make her heart skip. "I saw the name outside Amaz Florals. I thought, it can't be you. But it is." For a second, silence filled the shop. The sound of rain outside made everything feel heavier, more real. Emma brushed her hair back nervously. "So, what brings you here?" "Just passing by," he said, glancing around the shop. "Needed some flowers. My wife loves lilies." The word wife stung more than it should have. Emma nodded and walked toward the counter, trying to keep her voice steady. "Lilies are a good choice. They last long." Daniel watched her arrange the flowers. He noticed how carefully she worked, how she smiled at the little details. It reminded him of the girl who used to paint in the college courtyard, always lost in her own world. Back then, they had been closer than friends, but not quite more. Timing had never been right. Life had taken them in different directions. And they'd lost touch. When she handed him the bouquet, their fingers brushed for a brief moment. It was nothing, just a second, but it sent a rush of old memories through both of them. She quickly pulled her hand back. He smiled faintly, almost apologetically. "You still love flowers, huh?" he said softly. "They don't leave," she replied, half joking, half honest. Daniel's smile faded just a little. "Yeah, that's rare these days." Emma didn't know what to say to that. They stood there in a quiet that felt full of meaning. She wanted to ask about his life, his wife, where he'd been. But she didn't. Instead, she said lightly, "You should come by again. We get new flowers every week." "Maybe I will," he said, his tone gentle. "It's good to see you, Emma." When he left, the small bell above the door chimed softly. Emma stood there for a moment, holding the receipt he'd forgotten to take. The rain outside had stopped, but inside, her thoughts felt like a storm. She went to the window and watched him walk away, umbrella in hand, disappearing down the street. For years, she had convinced herself that what they had in the past was just a youthful spark, nothing more. But seeing him again brought everything back: the laughter, the long talks, the unspoken feelings. The rest of the day passed slowly. She kept working, arranging bouquets, serving customers, smiling when she needed to, but her mind was somewhere else. Every time she thought of Daniel's face, something inside her stirred, something she thought she had buried long ago. That night, when she closed the shop, she found herself thinking about the strange timing of it all. Why now? Why after all these years? She walked home through the damp streets, her heart heavy and confused. At home, she sat by the window with a cup of tea. The city lights reflected off the glass, and the sound of distant traffic filled the silence. She remembered their college days, how Daniel used to walk her home after classes. How they'd sit by the lake talking about dreams, about what they wanted from life. She had loved him quietly back then, too afraid to say it. And then he'd moved away for work. She'd never heard from him again. Until today, Emma tried to shake it off. He was married. He had a life. Whatever was between them belonged to another time. But her heart wouldn't listen to reason. It kept replaying the way he'd said her name. It's the way he looked at her, like he'd missed her too. The next morning, she arrived at the shop early. The air was fresh after the rain. She told herself she was just being silly. that yesterday meant nothing. But deep down, she knew something had shifted. Something she couldn't control. Around noon, a delivery van arrived with new flower boxes. Emma bent down to lift one, and for a moment, she remembered that exact motion. That first bend when she had heard Daniel's voice, it had started everything. One simple, ordinary action that turned her calm, steady life into something uncertain and fragile again. She stood up slowly, holding a white lily in her hand, staring at it. A small smile touched her lips, though she wasn't sure why. Maybe it was disbelief. Maybe it was hope. All she knew was that something had changed. She couldn't name it, couldn't explain it, but she could feel it in the air, in her chest, in every heartbeat that echoed a little faster than before, and for the first time in years. Emma didn't feel entirely alone. She placed the lily in a vase near the counter and looked toward the door, half expecting him to walk through again. He didn't, but her heart waited anyway. Outside, the clouds began to clear. The sunlight slipped through the window, touching the petals of the flowers, making them glow softly. Emma stood still, staring at the light, her thoughts drifting back to Daniel's face, his voice, his smile. She whispered to herself, "What are you doing, Emma?" But there was no answer. Just the quiet hum of the shop and the faint sound of the city beyond. That night, as she turned off the lights and locked the shop, she paused for a moment at the door. She could still hear the echo of his voice in her mind. It was strange how someone could walk back into your life after years and suddenly make everything feel alive again. Emma didn't know where this would lead, or if it even meant anything. But deep inside, she sensed that her world had just shifted. And once it did, there was no going back. The day she bent down to pick up a fallen petal, she had unknowingly picked up a piece of her past, and with it a story that was only beginning. Days passed after Daniel's visit, but Emma couldn't get him out of her mind. Every time the bell above the flower shop door rang, her heart skipped, expecting to see him again. And one afternoon, he did return. He walked in with that same calm smile, holding a cup of coffee in one hand. "For you," he said simply. "Thought you might need a break." "Ah!" Emma laughed softly, taking the cup. "Still know how to make an entrance, huh?" He shrugged. "Still know how to make a room feel peaceful." From that day, Daniel started visiting often. Sometimes he came for flowers, other times just to talk. He'd ask about her business, her family, her plans. Emma tried to keep it casual, but every conversation dug a little deeper into memories she thought were long gone. He told her he worked as an architect now, that he'd been married for 8 years to Claire, a writer. He didn't say much about their marriage. And Emma didn't ask, but she could sense the distance in his tone whenever he mentioned her. One rainy afternoon, Daniel showed up again, his shirt damp and his face tired. Emma was closing up the shop, surprised to see him at that hour. "Hey," she said softly. "You okay?" He hesitated before answering. "I just needed somewhere quiet," he said. "Home's been heavy lately." Emma didn't impress. She just motioned for him to sit while she poured tea. The rain outside drummed softly against the window, and for a while they sat in silence. Daniel looked around the shop, the plants, the soft light, the warm air scented with roses, and finally said, "This place feels like peace." Emma smiled gently. "That's what I wanted it to be." He took a slow breath. "Claire and I barely talk anymore. She's always working. I'm always traveling. We've grown into strangers sharing a roof." He stared at the steam rising from his tea. "It's strange. You spend years building something, and one day you realize you don't even know the person next to you." Emma felt a deep ache for him, but also for herself. She knew that emptiness. "Sometimes," she said quietly, "people change faster than love can keep up." Their eyes met, and the silence grew heavy. Neither looked away. The sound of the rain seemed to fade until there was nothing but that moment unspoken, fragile and real. Emma's heart raced, not with excitement, but with the quiet fear of what this could become. Daniel broke the silence first. "Do you ever wonder what life would have been like if we hadn't lost touch? Emma's voice was barely a whisper. All the time. For a second, the world felt still. Then Emma looked away, pretending to tidy the counter. "You should probably go before the rain stops," she said softly, her voice trembling a little. Daniel nodded, his eyes lingering on her face. "Yeah, you're right." He stood up, placed the empty cup down, and added quietly, "Thanks for the tea." When he left, Emma leaned against the counter, her breath unsteady. She knew she should keep her distance, but her heart didn't seem to listen. There was something about seeing Daniel against the familiarity, the warmth that pulled her in no matter how hard she tried to resist. Over the next few weeks, he came by more often. Sometimes he'd drop off lunch. Other times, just stop for a short chat. They started texting too, little messages that seemed innocent but carried weight beneath the surface. "How's your day? Did you eat? It's raining again," reminds me of that night. Emma knew it was dangerous. Daniel was married. She told herself they were just friends, that it was harmless. But she could feel it changing. Every smile, every word, every look carried something unspoken. She began to wait for his messages without realizing it. Her evenings felt quieter when he didn't text. One afternoon, as she arranged tulips for a client, her phone buzzed. It was Daniel. "Can I stop by? Just need to talk." She typed back, of course. He arrived 20 minutes later, wearing the same expression of exhaustion she had seen before. She didn't ask questions, just listened as he talked. He told her about an argument with Claire, about how they'd stopped understanding each other. Emma tried to be kind, but not involved. "Marriage has seasons," she said carefully. "Maybe this one's just a hard one." He looked at her with tired eyes. "You sound like you've lived it." She smiled faintly. "I've lived loneliness. It looks the same." For a while, neither spoke. The sun was setting outside, painting the shop in gold. Then Daniel said quietly, "When I'm here, I feel like myself again." Emma's heart twisted. She wanted to tell him not to say that it wasn't fair to him, to her, to anyone. But the words stuck in her throat. Instead, she said, "You should go home, Daniel. Fix what can be fixed." "Ah!" He nodded, but his eyes said something different. "I'll try," he murmured. When he left, Emma closed the shop and sat on the stool behind the counter. Her chest felt heavy, as if she had done something wrong, even though she hadn't crossed any line. But the truth was clear emotionally. They were already too close. That night, she dreamt of him. Not in a romantic way, but in that haunting, familiar way you dream of someone you can't stop thinking about. When she woke up, the ache was still there. Days turned into weeks, and their connection quietly deepened. They met for coffee once, saying it was just to catch up. They laughed like old friends, and for a few hours, the world felt light again. But when it was time to part, there was that same unspoken feeling between them, something real, something wrong, and something neither wanted to end. Emma began to avoid looking at her phone too much. She tried to stay busy with work, but even a customer mentioning lilies made her heart stir. It reminded her of him. Then one evening, as she closed up the shop, she saw Daniel standing outside in the fading light. "I was nearby," he said quietly. "Didn't plan to stop, but I couldn't help it." Emma's voice shook slightly. "You shouldn't be here." Step closer, his voice low but sincere. "I know, but I needed to see you." She didn't answer. The air between them was charged with everything unsaid. She wanted to tell him to go, to remind him that this wasn't right. But her heart was louder than reason. Finally, she whispered, "Daniel, we can't keep doing this." He looked at her with pain in his eyes. "No, but it feels like I've found something I didn't even realize I lost." She took a slow breath, steadying herself. Maybe that's what makes it so hard. They stood there in silence, two people bound by feelings they couldn't name out loud. Then, without another word, he turned and walked away. Emma watched him go, her heart aching and her eyes wet that night. She sat by the window again, staring out at the empty street. She knew she should forget him. She knew it was wrong to hold on to something that didn't belong to her. But love real, deep, complicated, love didn't always follow rules. And as the rain began to fall again, Emma whispered to herself, Don't fall again. Not this time, but deep down, she already knew she had. Emma tried to convince herself that what she shared with Daniel was only friendship, but her heart knew the truth. Each morning she told herself to move on, to keep her distance. Yet when her phone buzzed with his message, "Good morning, hope today's flowers are kind to you," she couldn't stop smiling. It was harmless, she said to herself. Just words. But words can carry feelings, and feelings can quietly take over. Their talks became a habit neither of them could break. They met for coffee once a week now, usually at a quiet cafe near the harbor. They talked about work, memories, and small things that didn't matter but somehow did. He told her about his job, about how designing buildings felt easier than keeping his marriage together. Emma listened, trying not to fall deeper, but every time he smiled, every time he looked at her with that mix of warmth and sadness, she felt her resolve weaken. One evening, he came to her shop just before closing. The sun was setting, painting the flowers in golden light. "I brought dinner," he said, holding up a paper bag. "Didn't think you'd have eaten yet?" Emma hesitated. "You shouldn't have." He smiled softly. "I wanted to." They sat together on the floor near the counter, eating takeout noodles from small boxes, laughing about old college stories. It felt simple, like years ago when life wasn't so complicated. But then, as the laughter faded, silence filled the room again. Daniel looked at her and said quietly, "I think about you more than I should." Emma froze, her heart pounding. She wanted to say don't, but she couldn't. Her voice came out weak. "Daniel, you're married." "I know," he said, his eyes full of conflict. "And I love Claire in a way that's built on time and history. But with you, it feels alive again, like something I forgot existed." Emma stood up, turning away to hide her tears. "That's not fair to her, to me, or even to you. We can't do this." He rose too, stepping closer but keeping his distance. "I'm not asking for anything. I just needed to tell you how I feel." She didn't respond. She couldn't. Her chest felt heavy with guilt and longing. When he finally left that night, she locked the door behind him and sank to the floor, crying quietly into her hands. She hadn't done anything wrong, yet it felt like she had. The next few days, she tried to avoid him. She didn't reply to his messages. She buried herself in work, taking extra orders and staying late at the shop. But one evening, as she was about to close, Daniel showed up again. He looked exhausted, as if he hadn't slept. "Emma," he said softly, "please don't shut me out." Her throat tightened. "Daniel, this isn't right. You have a life. You need to fix it." "I've tried," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "Claire and I talk, but it's all surface. We don't touch, we don't laugh, we don't connect. It's like living with a ghost. And then I see you and it feels like breathing again." Emma closed her eyes, trying to stay strong. "You're looking for escape, not love. I don't want to be that for you." He shook his head. "It's not escape. It's truth. You're the one person who still sees me for who I am." Those words broke something inside her. She didn't answer, but she didn't send him away either. They stood there in silence, close but not touching. Hearts caught in a storm neither could control. That night, Emma couldn't sleep. She kept seeing his face, hearing his voice. She remembered the way he said her name, like it meant something more. It scared her how deeply he had gotten into her heart again. She wasn't the kind of woman to chase someone else's husband. And here she was, half in love, half drowning in guilt. Days turned into weeks. They didn't meet as often, but their connection stayed strong through small texts and late-night calls. He'd message her photos of sunsets from his office window, or a random flower that reminded him of her shop. It was tender and painful all at once. Then one night, Daniel called her. His voice was low and tired. "Claire found our messages," he said quietly. Emma's stomach dropped. "Oh no! What did she say?" "She didn't say much. Just asked if I was happy. I couldn't even answer." Emma felt her eyes sting. "Daniel, this has to stop. For everyone's sake. I can't be part of something that hurts people." There was a long silence before he replied. "You're right. I just don't know how to let go of something that feels this real. Sometimes love isn't meant to stay, she whispered. Sometimes it just teaches us who we are. After that night, Daniel didn't come around for a while. The shop felt emptier than usual. Emma told herself this was for the best. That distance was what they both needed. Still, she found herself glancing at the door every time the bell rang. 2 weeks later, he came again. He looked different, tired, serious. I told Claire everything, he said quietly. Emma's breath caught. Everything, he nodded. Not details. Just that I met someone who reminded me what it means to feel alive. She cried. I cried. We both said things we'd been holding in for years. Emma's heart hurt for him, for her, for all of it. And now? She asked softly. He took a deep breath. We're trying again. Counseling, honest talks, real effort. I owe her that much. She deserves it. Emma forced a small smile. That's good, Daniel. You're doing the right thing. I know, he said, his voice cracking slightly. But that doesn't make it easy. He stepped closer, not touching her, just standing there, two people tied by a feeling that had no place in the real world. You changed me, Emma, he said quietly. I'll never forget that. She nodded, tears sliding down her cheeks. And I'll never forget you. He smiled sadly. Maybe in another life, things would have been different. Maybe, she whispered. Then he turned and left. The sound of the bell above the door was soft. Final dot. Emma stood still for a long time, staring at the empty doorway. She felt everything at once. Love, sorrow, relief, loss. It was as if she had lived a whole lifetime in those few months, that night. She walked along the quiet streets of Seattle, the cool air brushing her face. The city lights shimmered on the wet pavement, and she realized something. Love doesn't always need to end in togetherness. Sometimes its purpose is to remind us that we're still capable of feeling deeply, caring, of being human. She returned home, made a cup of tea, and sat by the window. For the first time in weeks, she felt calm. Painful, yes, but peaceful. The next morning, she opened her shop early. The smell of fresh flowers filled the air again. Life went on, quietly, beautifully. She placed a single white lily in a vase by the window. Her small reminder of a love that had come changed her. And gone. And as sunlight touched the petals, Emma smiled faintly. Some stories aren't meant to last forever. Some are just meant to awaken the heart. The morning Daniel came back to the flower shop, Emma knew it would be the last time. Something in the air felt different still, almost heavy, like the world was holding its breath. The bell above the door chimed softly, and when she looked up, he was standing there holding a single white lily. His smile was faint but calm, his eyes tired yet kind. Hi, he said quietly. Emma forced a small smile. Hi, he walked closer, placing the flower gently on the counter. I thought I should come in person. She nodded, unsure what to say. How's Claire? She's okay, he said, his voice low. We've been talking a lot lately. It's been hard, but honest. We decided to give our marriage another chance. The words hit her like a quiet wave. She had known this was coming, but hearing it out loud still made her chest ache. She looked down at the flower, tracing its stem with her fingers. That's good, Daniel. She deserves that. He hesitated, watching her. And you deserve someone who can give you more than stolen moments. Emma tried to smile, but her throat felt tight. Maybe I do. But I'll always be grateful for the moments we had. For a long time, they just stood there, two people who had once shared something deep, but now had to let it go. Outside, the morning light streamed through the window, catching the dust in the air, turning it to gold. It felt like the world was saying goodbye with them. Daniel leaned on the counter, his voice soft. I kept thinking about the first day I saw you again. You were bending down to pick up a petal. I almost didn't say anything, but I did, and everything changed. Emma smiled faintly. It did. You reminded me what it means to feel again. For that, I'll always be thankful. He nodded. You reminded me too. I'd forgotten what connection felt like. But you also reminded me of the kind of man I want to be, the one who keeps his promises." There was no anger between them, no bitterness, only understanding. They had both learned something from each other, something life-changing but not meant to last. Daniel looked around the shop one last time. "This place suits you," he said. "Peaceful, honest. You make people's days brighter without even knowing it." Emma's eyes softened. "And you build things that last, Daniel. Maybe that's what love is supposed to be, something that endures even when it's hard." He smiled gently, eyes glistening. Maybe. For a brief moment, they stood close enough to feel the warmth of each other's presence. There were no promises, no confessions, no dramatic words, just a quiet knowing that this was goodbye. "I should go," Daniel said finally. "Claire's waiting. We're starting fresh. She wants to plant a small garden behind the house." He smiled, glancing at the flowers around them. "Maybe I'll come to you for advice." Emma laughed softly, her voice shaking. "Tell her to plant lilies. They're strong. They bloom even after storms." He nodded, eyes holding hers one last time. "Take care, Emma. You too," she whispered, and then he turned and walked out of the shop. The bell chimed softly as the door closed behind him. Emma stood there, frozen, watching him walk down the street until he disappeared into the crowd. A single tear slid down her cheek. But it wasn't sadness anymore, it was release. The silence that followed felt strange at first, then peaceful. She looked at the lily he'd left on the counter and smiled. It was pure white, perfectly opened, untouched by time. She picked it up, placed it in a small glass vase by the window, and whispered, "Goodbye." The next few days passed quietly. Daniel didn't call or text, and Emma didn't expect him to. Life slowly settled back into its rhythm. Customers came and went. She laughed again, worked again, lived again. But every once in a while, she would think of him, how they had met again, what they had shared, and how it had ended with kindness instead of regret. One evening, as the sun began to set, she sat near the window with her tea. The sky was painted in pinks and oranges, the same colors as the flowers in her shop. She thought about love, how it can come at the wrong time but still leave behind something beautiful. She realized that not every story needs to end in forever. Some just need to end right. Weeks turned into months. Emma's shop grew busier, and so did she. One afternoon, a young couple walked in, laughing together, their hands intertwined. They were choosing flowers for their wedding. Emma helped them pick roses and lilies. As she wrapped the bouquet, the woman said, "I love how gentle these lilies look, strong but soft." Emma smiled. That's how love should be. After they left, she stood by the window again, watching the sunlight fall across the counter. She felt a quiet pride in her heart. She had loved, lost, and let go with grace. That, she realized, was its own kind of strength. Then, one spring morning, as she was arranging new flowers, a letter arrived. It was from Daniel. The envelope was simple, his handwriting neat and familiar. She hesitated before opening it. Inside was a short note. "Emma, I wanted you to know that Claire and I are doing better. The garden is growing. We planted lilies, just like you said. Every time I see them, I think of Peace and of you. Thank you for reminding me how to love again and for letting me go when I couldn't stay." Daniel. Emma smiled through tears as she folded the letter and placed it inside her journal. It wasn't a love letter, it was closure. A gentle end to a chapter that had once been full of longing and confusion, now replaced with understanding and calm. That evening, she took a walk through the city. The streets glowed under the setting sun, and the breeze carried the scent of spring flowers. She felt light, free, as if she had finally made peace with the past. Back at her shop, she bent down to pick up a fallen petal just like she had on the day everything began. But this time, she smiled instead of wondering what would come next. She had learned that every ending carries its own quiet beauty, and every goodbye can open the door to something new. She stood up, placed the petal in her palm, and whispered, "Some love stories don't end, they just find a place to rest." Outside, the world kept moving, the streets alive with laughter, cars passing by, life unfolding. Inside, the little flower shop glowed softly under the evening light, filled with the scent of lilies, peace, and memories that no longer hurt. Emma locked the door for the night, turned off the lights, and took one last look at the white lily in the window. Its petals were still open, untouched, standing tall against the fading light. And as she walked away, the gentle chime of the bell behind her felt like a quiet promise, not of what could have been, but of what was beautiful, brief, and unforgettable.